It starts with the negative, a time for war, and it ends with a positive, a time for peace. What does this mean? It means that in order to get to the time of peace, you need to go through the time of war. You need to be ready for war, if necessary. This video was made possible through the kind support of my sponsors over at Patreon. Patreon is a great way to help independent creators like myself produce original content. If you'd like to get more English language videos from me, please consider becoming a supporter via Patreon. You can find the link in the description below. Thank you very much. Shalom everyone. Today is a difficult day for the Jewish people and for everyone standing on the side of peace and justice and liberty. Tragically, 6 of the hostages to a safe return we have all been praying for have been found murdered by Hamas. And apparently this happened very shortly before they were found. The Hamas terrorists realized that the IDF forces are proceeding their way, coming their way, and they didn't want us to receive the prize of getting the hostages alive. And this is actually what happened last week. Last week, another hostage, actually a Muslim Arab Bedouin. Hamas don't really care if you're Jewish or if you're Muslim. If you can be used as a bargaining chip, then you have worth for them, and if not, then you're worthless. He was found alive. And not wanting to repeat that mistake, so to speak, they saw that we were coming to the tunnel where those 6 hostages were being kept. And after 11 months of imprisonment, they promptly killed them off. And that's how we found them. So months and months of prayers and of rescue attempts on our side, and months of prayers and who knows what mental survival techniques employed by the hostages themselves ended in a very fast, very emotionless, very tragic, very horrible execution. Now this is raising the big question, the biggest question maybe that's been hovering over this whole conflict, which is whether Israel should agree to a deal, to some sort of deal with Hamas, in which they get a ceasefire and a time to recuperate, and they get some or many prisoners, actual terrorists that we caught and put in prison, unlike the totally innocent civilians that they took hostage. They get them, and we in return get some or all of the hostages. Because rescuing them right now, all of them in military action, like we had in some cases, seems like an impossibility. Because the more we do it, the more they realize it can be done, and then they have this policy of shooting them whenever we're close. And so the only feasible way, it would appear, to get them back alive appears to be striking a deal. But a deal, in effect, means indefinitely pausing or stopping the military campaign, which set out to eradicate Hamas, to topple it completely, destroy it completely, so it's not able to repeat the horrendous acts that it did on October 7th. Now, as we speak right now, there are massive predemonstrations that are held in both Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, possibly in other places in the world, that are advocating for precisely striking such a deal and discontinuing the war as it has been carried on. Although as much as I usually enjoy teaching Torah and going deep into Torah concepts, at times like this, I think everyone is required to chime in some way on these topics and try and help other people formulate, set their mind straight and try to figure out what we should do about this. It's very confusing. We all want the hostages back. Rescuing them through war seems like it's not going to work for everyone. And maybe our luck ran out with those hostages that we have been able to recapture. And so the deal seems more and more tempting. So I will try to now address this topic. And I will try to do it from a Jewish Torah perspective to the best of my abilities. So basically, the issue here is really quite simple. I mean, it's hard to tackle, it's hard to deal with. But the dilemma, in essence, it's quite simple. It has to do with short-term versus long-term thinking or solutions, And it also has to do with the head versus heart. Clearly, all of our hearts are with the hostages. And I don't know about you, but I really wept today when I heard those horrible news and just imagined those people surviving and living and waiting to be rescued and waiting to somehow come back, and then just having their lives ended in such a way. So our hearts are with them, and we all want them now. We all want them to come back now, or as soon as possible. But like in every other situation in life, we have to consider the ramifications of striking any kind of deal with an organization like Hamas. And we have to realize the following. A ceasefire with Hamas would be perceived by Palestinians and by the Arab Muslim world in general as a victory. It will be perceived as a victory despite all the loss of lives they suffered. Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, he was the head of the Hamas in the Gaza Strip. He's now the actual head of all of Hamas. He will come out with like a V sign with his fingers. And he will become a legendary leader for decades, if not centuries to come, in the Islamist militant society. How come this will be seen as a victory if so many Palestinian lives were lost? By the way, we don't know how many lives were lost because all the numbers are brought up by Hamas and we have no way of knowing the numbers. But we know that many lives are lost. And we'll talk about it in a minute. So how come this will be perceived as a victory? It's really very simple. The whole plan that Hamas had was that they would lose many, many Palestinian lives. This was the plan. There was no other way that this would roll out, and they knew this. Ever since Israel unilaterally withdrew from the Gaza Strip in 2005, 19 years ago, and Hamas took power very, very shortly afterwards, trillions of dollars poured in from various sources, including, unfortunately, enabled by the Israeli government, but from all over the world, from the Arab world, from the Western world, from the UN, trillions of dollars poured in. All of them, almost all of them, were used to build the massive, massive underground city of terror tunnels. Some of them are like 15 stories buildings, but upside down, buried, dug into the ground. And tons of tunnels going everywhere. And for weapons. For building more and more weapons, and for building all these terror tunnels that will hide and protect only the militants. No other serious infrastructure was built, other than very, very basic ones, and absolutely zero shelters for civilians. So while Hamas built all these tunnels so that their own soldiers will be able to hide in and use in order to go out and fight out of them, and of course keep the hostages that they were planning to take, zero shelters were built for civilians. The plan was very simply to attack us in such a severe way that we would be forced to attack back very, very forcefully. And in the process, many, many Palestinian civilians would inevitably die. They will be utterly exposed while all the Hamas fighters are underground. The international community would maybe at first empathize with us, but very soon afterwards, as the numbers of Palestinian casualties rises, they will empathize with the plight of the Palestinians, and then they would pressure us, the Israeli government, the Israeli state, into a ceasefire. And in addition, one goal was to strike us so severely that we would have to strike back. And the other goal was to take a lot of hostages that they can then use to leverage us into this kind of surrender. So they wanted all their civilians to die. They kept them exposed as human shields. And they wanted them to die so that there will be international pressure. And they wanted to have hostages so that we ourselves would be weakened from within, because they know that we're very soft when it comes to our own people, and we want to take them back at any price. And in fact, Yahya Sinwar himself was released in such a deal following the abduction of Gilad Shalit. It was basically repeating that on a 100-fold scale. So they don't care how many citizens die. And that was the plan. The plan was for them to die, and so it was part of the deal, part of the plan, that they would die, but at the end of the day, there's only one goal, that Hamas will remain in power. Doesn't matter how many people die, if in the end, the Hamas leadership and their soldiers are standing, and they're still governing, ruling the Gaza Strip, that's a victory, even if 90% of all civilians died. It's not close to what's happening, but just you understand the logic of what they're going through, what they had in mind. So this why a ceasefire for them will be victory. And then the ramifications following that will be, very simply, is that they will recuperate, they will lick their wounds, and they will see all those victims as sacrifices, necessary sacrifices, and then the conflict will go on more and more. And they will go back to their tunnels, dig more tunnels, and plan the next attack. And then they will want to kidnap more people, take more hostages, and then extort us for more land, for more money, for more whatever it is. And it will encourage them to grow. And so thinking long term and understanding the whole situation, and this includes the element of the heart, that loving the hostages also needs to extend to love of any possible, God forbid, future hostages and future victims of this war that may extend and continue more and more, just like it has continued throughout these decades. So this is just to understand what it means to strike a deal. A deal is very tempting in the short run, because we all want the hostages back. But its upshot, what it means is that they will see this as a victory, as a sign that this method of attacking us very barbarically and very strongly and taking as many hostages as they can works. And the fact that we may think that they suffered so much because so much of Gaza is destroyed and so many civilians died, for them, it doesn't matter, because they're still standing and the method works, and they will continue using this method. Now I want to connect this to something very interesting, that I'm sort of going another direction, but it's really totally connected. And this will serve to give us another sort of deeper layer or deeper way of understanding this whole topic. So over these past few weeks that I haven't been teaching here, I had the privilege of meeting a very, very interesting individual. And this individual is David Friedman. David Friedman, if you don't know, served as U.S. ambassador to Israel under the Trump administration. He was Trump's lawyer for many years, and then Trump made him the ambassador to Israel. In those 4 years, what he was able to achieve is something I've never heard of any ambassador anywhere achieve, almost like he was like a minister in the government. He was like the foreign minister, but he was just the ambassador. So famously, he had the U.S. embassy be moved to Jerusalem. But the main thing he was involved in, and he was a main figure behind this, instrumental in what was called the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords was the official peace accords that were struck between Israel and the Emirates and another Muslim state called Bahrain. And then what followed was like a semi-agreement or normalization of relationships, not as official, but very much practical, with Morocco and Sudan. These are unbelievable achievements. I've been living in the Middle East for 50 years, ever since I was born. And if you would have told me 5 years ago, that's what happened, but 8 years ago, 10 years ago, that we will have peace that will come about very, very rapidly with the Emirates, with Morocco, with Sudan, no one would have believed you. No one would have believed you. And this is an unbelievable achievement. It wasn't only him, but he was instrumental in this process. And of course, Trump played a role, and those countries themselves very bravely also played a role. And they realized that the most dangerous entity in the Middle East is not Israel, it's Iran. And they realized they need to build a kind of lobby against Iran, and they need to cooperate with America, and they need to cooperate with us. Now, a key phrase that Friedman and Trump and Netanyahu and all the people involved used, and that now connects to what we're talking about now, a key phrase that they used was peace through strength. That's the main thing I want to focus on now. This phrase is very, very unintuitive to Westerners. But he was able to realize that this is the right thing to use as a kind of motto. Peace through strength. You would think that peace is the opposite of war. Strength is for wars. You want to fight a war, you display power, you display strength. You want to make peace, you want to show the other side that you're not eager to project strength, you're not eager to use power, you're eager to take down your arms and shake hands and strike a deal and make concessions and give up land and give up whatever it is you're giving up. This is how peace is conducted. That's the intuitive way. But the counterintuitive method, which worked miraculously well, totally underappreciated by the media, because the media is obviously far more liberal than conservative, but no one can argue with the results. The results are incredible. It worked. It worked going with the counterintuitive way of power through strength. And he says in his book, he gave me his book, I'm halfway reading it, and he said, you want war in the Middle East, project weakness. You want peace, you have to project strength. So why is this? What's the logic behind this? How does it work? So the main reason for this, and this is now, I'm going to place like a major thesis here, but a major element of this has to do with a very, very basic, let's call it psychosocial rift or difference between modern Western civilization and what we can call the Western mind, and not just the Arab mind, far more broad than that. It's what we can call generally the Eastern bloc of the global political landscape. I'm talking about the, very broadly speaking, Arab society, but not just that. Also Russia, and also China and North Korea. Right? This is the world is now breaking up once again into major blocks, and the very, very surprising, again, something we couldn't have imagined 2 decades ago, is China and North Korea, communist dictatorships, colluding with Russia and with Iran to fight the West, because they're so different. China and North Korea are atheist communist regimes. Russia is a traditional kind of Christian country, a variation of Christianity. It has to do with the Eastern Europe, the Orthodox Church, and everything that also is contained in the Russian culture. And of course, the Arab world is primarily Islamic, Muslim. How can they work together? So the reason, what they have in common, is that they're all very authoritarian and hierarchical and militant. They don't believe that democracy is the best or the least worse regime. They don't believe in democracy. They don't believe in liberty. They don't believe in freedom. They believe in a centrist government that rules the majority of the people and does so in a very forceful way. And this is what both the Arab Muslim world and Russia, which is basically Christian, but a different kind of Christianity, an Eastern European Christianity, different than the Western one, and the communist dictatorships have in common. And they dislike the West. They see the West, the fact that the West has made equality and freedom and liberty, liberalism, liberal democracy, the highest ideal. They see this as ultimately causing a society to crumble from within. And in fact, they're really trying to hasten this crumbling in various ways. China is obviously doing it through the internet. Iran is also doing it. They have a lot of bots, and they have TikTok, and it's very clearly also aimed at trying to hasten a kind of inwards crumbling or breaking apart from within of Western culture, which is already taking place in their eyes, and there's some truth to this. When you say that everything is equal, it starts with just saying that democracy and liberalism are the highest ideals. And then the left, the progressive left, which is always more radical in trying to take the ideal of again, liberalism, democracy, and equality, and disliking hierarchy and disliking authoritarianism, at least as a notion, is pushing this more radically forward, while the right and the conservatives are trying to hold this back. But even the conservatives still believe that democracy and liberalism are the best ideals. They want a liberal society, a society with liberty, with individualism. All this in the eyes of that Eastern Bloc, again, as varied as its different factions and powers may be, they all think that this doesn't have a lot of future. If you're saying that everything is equal, you end up, the society ends up crumbling, not believing in anything. Society needs to look up to a leadership that's above everyone. Society has to look up towards a leadership that's hierarchical and authoritarian and rises above everyone and sort of points the way to some sort of transcendent ideal. The transcendent ideal could be a spiritual one, like in the case of Islam, and again, some variations of Christianity. It could be a materialistic ideal of the equality of all the citizens and having a society based on communist ideals, not capitalistic ideals. It doesn't matter. Once you have this ideal and it's very, it unites society, and you raise it on a pedestal, on a pillar, and you don't say everyone has their own opinion, everyone has their own ideology, and everything is equal. So this Eastern Bloc does not appreciate weakness. It appreciates strength. And if you want to create any sort of peace with these kinds of societies, in the case of the Middle East, it's primarily Arab Muslim societies. In the case of thinking more broadly about a possible status quo doesn't lead to a world war with China or with Russia, then you have to project strength. They have to fear you. They have to see that you're in some way, any way, on their same wavelength. And then they both fear you and respect you and appreciate you. And they know that you are a force to be reckoned with. And only then is there any chance for peace. This is what David Friedman and his partners who did the Abraham Accords, Trump also realized this very, very well. This is also very much a Jewish value. So hang on, just a little bit before that. So they realized this, and this is what enabled the Abraham Accords to take place, is also what enabled Trump to apparently deter Putin from doing any more invasions into Ukraine, which he was into before Trump, and back into it after Trump during the Biden administration. But throughout the 4 years of Trump, he apparently was very much deterred by this, because he knew that Trump is a little bit crazy, is unafraid of using power, and he's not someone soft. So he was, and you could see that from afar, Trump and Putin are sort of have this understanding between them. The same enabled Trump to meet and get along with the dictator of North Korea. Terrible, horrible, the worst dictatorship in the world, the darkest place in the world, literally the darkest place. They have no electricity there through most of the country at night. But there was some respect shown to Trump by Kim Jong-un, the dictator of North Korea, because of this ideology of projecting strength. Now, this is also very much a Jewish ideal. It's a Jewish concept. I think it's no coincidence that David Friedman, who's an observant Jew, played a key role in the Abraham Accords. It's no coincidence. He brought to the table a voice that regular Americans and more atheist or secular Jews don't bring to the table, both from the left and the right. he brought to the table a kind of ideology, a kind of perception of the world, a way to view the world, which is very much rooted in Jewish not the classical Jewish helplessness that the world is accustomed to, and most Jews have become accustomed to, that the world loves loving, but the kind of original biblical Jewishness that has to do with wanting peace above all. The Torah is all the time talking about peace, the whole messianic vision, the whole messianic ideal, the whole end of days picture of the world is a world in which nation does not fight another nation, and no one shall teach war, and it's world peace. Nobody spoke about world peace, just as quite as the Jewish prophets spoke about this. There were many visions of how the world will end. It either ends with back to chaos in other ancient societies, or it ends with a kind of leaving of the world, a kind of nirvana, that you leave the world, you loosen yourself from the tragic cycle of the world. But the world itself is trapped in a tragic cycle of constant wars. But in the Bible, the prophets of the Bible pointed like an arrow. The arrow of time is pointing towards an ideal of world peace. And yet, this is the story of the Bible. The narrative of the Bible is always also presents the fact that until this ideal is realized, and in fact, in order to get to this ideal, we have to be ready and prepared to bear arms and to build an actual physical, forceful kingdom, state, sovereignty in the land, and only then can we achieve peace. You can't achieve peace through weakness. You have to achieve peace through strength. In fact, there are many verses that hint at this. So even if you just look at the very famous verse from Ecclesiastes that talk about a time to be born and a time to die, and a time for embracing and a time not to embrace, and then it ends, the 28 different times, a time for this and a time for that, with 14 on one side, 14 on the other side. It ends with a time for war and a time for peace. Sometimes the positive precedes the negative, like in the beginning, a time to be born and a time to die. It starts with the positive and then ends with the negative, just like the human life cycle. But sometimes it's the other way around, and it ends with the other way around. It starts with the negative, a time for war, and it ends with a positive, a time for peace. What does this mean? It means that in order to get to the time of peace, you need to go through the time of war. You need to be ready for war. It doesn't mean you have to actually have a war. It means you're able to, you're not afraid to wage war if necessary. And you're prepared to wage war. And you're prepared to project to the other side that if they won't cooperate, you will go into war. And of course, this has to be a real threat, a threat you can actually make true on and engage in that war if necessary. A time for war, and only through this can there be a time for peace. Another famous verse is, of course, the most famous verse in Isaiah that talks about in the future, they shall beat their swords into plowshares. Beating the swords into plowshares. So again, it sounds like no more war, and now we're going into peace. We don't want swords, and we don't need swords anymore. We can reshape them into plowshares. But the term used, and Friedman is referring to this in his book very beautifully, is that the term used is to beat the swords into plowshares. This is a forceful image. You beat the swords into plowshares. So first, it means you have to have a sword first. It starts with a sword. This is the reality. You don't rush towards the plowshares. You don't say, well, the other party, my enemy, is carrying a sword, but I am going to take down my sword, put down my sword, and turn it into a plowshare. No, you have to have a sword. You have to use the sword. And then through this not willingness, but what's the word? Nechonut, being prepared to engage in warfare if necessary by holding the swords and then beating the swords. It's like going through, it's like grounding something and extracting its essence. You have to go through the reality of war, the reality of conflict. You have to be there, present in the reality of conflict. And then through this state of holding a sword and beating the sword, which is also sounds a bit combatant, but it means going through the process of conflict and grounding it from within and taking out its essence. Are you able to turn it into a plowshare? You're able to achieve true peace, lasting peace, a mature peace, not a peace that is a dream that you have, that you want to hold on to, that you are eager to achieve in a rushed way. So I think it's a beautiful way to think about this. Now, another thing he says in the book, which I want to focus on, and that's how we'll end. There was, back in the Oslo Accords days, there was a cliche that was used by Rabin, by Paris. They said, peace is made with enemies. You don't make peace with friends. That's not a problem. Obviously, why are we meeting with the PLO? Why are we signing the Oslo Accords with our enemies? Peace is made with enemies. So Friedman says very beautifully, he says, just a small correction. Peace is made with former enemies. You don't make peace with an enemy while they're fighting you and while they're threatening to kill each and every one of you and are sworn to destroy you. You don't make peace with such a group. And you also have to be careful to make sure that they're not saying one thing when they're meeting you and another thing in Arabic when they're addressing their own people. You have to you have to make sure that they mean what they say, and you have to see that they're saying it to the other side, that there's an actual peace camp on the other side, not just on your camp, not just on your side. How does an enemy become a former enemy? A former enemy. An enemy becomes a former enemy either by willingly stopping fighting you when they accept the fact that you're here and you're here to stay, just like happened with the Abraham Accords. They approached the West saying, we want to have some sort of treaty. And so that's one way. And another way is by having them surrender, by having them lose the conflict, by actually going through with the conflict all the way to the end. Hamas obviously doesn't show any signs of belonging to the former camp. It doesn't show any sign of being like the Emirates or like Morocco and coming of their own accord and saying, listen, we understand the state of Israel is here to stay. We understand that Iran is crazy and we want to join you. And they obviously belong. Their only way to make any sort of peace with the people of the Gaza Strip is having Hamas either surrender or be exterminated. There's no other way. And either way, it means willingness or preparedness to engage in the conflict in whatever way, either as just a display of force, as with the Abraham Accords, no bloodshed, or, if necessary, to engage in the war all the way and bringing Hamas to their knees. Which, by the way, there's only one way to do that, and that is by reconquering their land. If you know the Islamic theology says that there's only one excuse for stopping jihad, for not engaging in jihad, because jihad is extremely highly ranked in Islamic theology, and the ultimate vision of Islam is that via jihad, the entire world will come under the rule of Islam, unless you're losing land. If you're not expanding your land, you're actually losing your land. You're allowed, and it makes sense to stop jihad and put it off. And so there are ways to make Hamas surrender. We're giving them aid, we're giving them water, we're giving them electricity. There are ways to do so, but it requires thinking in the long term, and it requires thinking with our head before our hearts, and it requires being willing and able to, again, counterintuitive, to display very, very forceful strength, not in such a piecemeal way, but in a much more decisive way, even thinking decisively. And this will counterintuitively bring a faster end to the war. They will realize they're actually really losing, not losing lives, which don't matter to them. They have to lose land. They have to realize they have no way to go. And they're totally surrounded, and they're losing totally. They don't have water, they don't have electricity, and they're totally losing, and especially again when land is taken. And then, although this sounds very cruel and very hard and very hard for softer people like us, like myself, it's hard for me to say, but I know rationally that it's taking the idea of peace through strength to its logical end. And so by doing something like this, they will be able to surrender. And surrendering is that's the least ideal way, but the only way possible in this case of becoming from enemies to former enemies. And then we can talk about peace and ceasefires and finding a way for the Palestinians to live in the Gaza Strip with some normal government. The last point I want to make is that all this is very much connected to the upcoming elections in the United States. Because if we look at the two candidates, and we can think whatever we want, and we can like maybe one of them as a person more than we like the other one, but if you look at their ideologies and their perceptions, then they can't be farther apart. And it's very, very clear which one is going to lead this kind of thinking, which is more rational, more grounded, more sober, more understanding of how truly other this other is, how truly different it is, that they don't think like Westerners. They don't want a civil society, a liberal society. They have an ideology that they want to advance in a military way, and they're not going to stop. So soberly understanding this is the same person who was behind the Abraham Accords. This is Donald Trump. Like him, hate him, he understood this, and he implemented this. In the Abraham Accords, he implemented this just by virtue of his character and the fact that he was able to deter the dictators of the world, and they're not deterred now with Biden and Harris. And the other person, Harris, is exactly the opposite. And maybe on a personal level, she's maybe nicer to interact with, and she's softer and she's motherly, but all this is the exact opposite of what we need, at least in the Middle East. And I think not just for the Middle East, because the war in the Middle East is fastly becoming a threat of a global third world war. So the fact that someone like this is thinking about the suffering on both sides and totally ignoring and thinking again, once again, deluding ourselves, that the Palestinians may want exactly what Westerners want, what Israelis want. They just want peace and quiet. They want a livelihood, and not realizing this is, again, there are barbarians in the world. And there are people who think in radically different ways. They're authoritarian, they're militant, they're hierarchical, they believe in strength and power, and they're imperialistic in nature. They don't want to settle for just as land, to call their home, and then forget about the rest of the world. They have an imperialistic, exactly what the West gave up on. The West gave up on imperialism, but that has opened the space for much worse imperialists to raise their heads. And Harris does not understand this in the least. So I don't have an American citizenship. I don't vote for America, but many of the viewers here do. And as much as this means anything, then I try to make my little voice heard that, again, dislike him, love him, whatever you want, Trump will be able to lead and will be able to present and project an ideology that, although it's not cozy or comfortable or nice sounding, and may not have the word peace sort of plastered in pastel colors all over it. It's more, there's something more frightening about it. There's something more a little bit militant about it. It's not afraid to project strength, like we said. But this is exactly what is needed in order to achieve what leftists desire the most, what everyone in the world desires the most, which is peace. So may we all see an end to this conflict coming about through unabashed display of strength, not for strength's own sake, but for the sake of true, real peace. So thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video. Hi everyone, if you enjoyed this episode, please press like, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment. If you want more English language videos from me, please consider becoming a supporter via Patreon. You can find the link in the description below. Thank you very much, and see you in the next episode.